Now, there's a college football playoff scenario at play here. There's actually several, but there are a couple that I actually want to give my time to because we could be here, quite honestly, doing a 3-hour live show if I wanted to go through every single scenario that we could see. But there are a couple that I think are interesting. Let's say Michigan or Ohio State, Florida State, and Washington finish undefeated with a Big Ten title. Okay. Alabama and Texas finished 12-1 with an SEC and Big 12 title, respectively. I'd expect the Big Ten champ to get in, as that's one of the 3 best teams in college football. I would expect Washington to get in. I would expect Alabama to get in because they would have beaten a number 1 ranked Georgia team that has operated at a level that we have not seen in this era of college football. And I would expect Georgia to get in there because we all believe that Georgia is one of the 4 best teams in college football. The only way that gets upended is if somehow the Yellow Jackets pull one out this weekend, and I just don't see that. As a matter of fact, during our show meeting, producer Tyler had the really great gag, or was it producer Cat? One of my producers had the great gag that Kirby Smart's nice thing to say about Georgia Tech was, well, they're close by. And that's about where it's been in that rivalry in recent years. I don't even think Calvin Johnson being on that team of Georgia Tech is going to change the outcome of it. But that just to show just how solid Georgia is going into this rivalry week and going into the SEC championship game. I think Alabama will really have to beat them the way that they beat Texas Christian for that to really change our minds. And I just don't see that as happening. I think those are the 4 best teams too, right? So you're also talking about not just the criteria for which I want this committee to stick to and for which I believe in, but pulling the 4 best teams out of your behind is really kind of a bad look because Liberty's undefeated, but ain't nobody here going to say it's one of the 4 best teams in college football, even if they do beat a New Mexico State that absolutely made Auburn put money in the bag. We're going to get back to that too. Another scenario that I want to talk about, which I think is even more interesting. Let's assume Texas's win against Alabama on the road in September is impressive, but not as impressive as, say, Alabama beating Georgia in the SEC championship game. Okay, well, that might bode well, though, for Texas getting in the college football playoff as a 1-loss team. If Ohio State and Michigan is tight, say it's a 1-score game and not the 22-point difference that it was last year, I think the winner blows out Iowa. Let's say they do. You could see Ohio State and Michigan being considered 2 of the 4 best teams in the country for a second year in a row. And I would have a hard time with this. Alabama beating Georgia, Washington losing to Wazoo or in the Pac-12 title game, and Texas losing in the Big 12 title game, and Florida State losing to either Florida or Louisville. I think with that sort of a scenario, you end up with Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, and Georgia as your college football playoff teams. This is not the kind of outcome for which we thought the college football playoff was going to give us, right? We all thought that perhaps we're going to see 4 undefeated teams from 4 different conferences and maybe 1-loss team that gets left out. It's not really gone that way most of the time. But I also believe every college football fan in America would show up to watch Ohio State, Michigan again, Alabama, Georgia again, or even an SEC versus Big Ten showdown because that's what the sport has become. It has become 2 super conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC, right? Texas, Oklahoma going to the SEC next year, and then felt like half the Pac-12 going to the Big Ten next year, but in particular, Washington and Oregon, to say nothing of, I would love to see Texas play Alabama again and see how that game goes. And I would love to see Georgia play Ohio State again, see how that game goes. So I think this committee is thinking like I am, which is to say, don't give us a reason to put Ohio State and Michigan back in this thing and Alabama and Georgia back in this thing because we know, A, we would like to see it, and B, the championship game is probably going to be more competitive than Georgia versus Texas Christian, right? I think those 2 scenarios are the ones for which I'm watching closely to see if we get closer or further away from those things as we approach this rivalry weekend, ahead of championship weekend. But wouldn't it be damn fine if we got Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Georgia in a college football playoff from a neutral's perspective? I would be here for it. But if you like what you've seen, consider subscribing to the #1 college football show on YouTube, the Fox Sports app, or wherever you get your podcast.